here we're going to start looking at graphic scales, basically why they're important, some examples, and then how to actually draw them. So I'm going to be using AutoCAD here. You can follow the same exact process even if you're not in AutoCAD. So don't worry about that. AutoCAD versus Rhino, the drawing process for these and the concepts associated with them is exactly the same. So first, let's take a look at a couple of examples. So this is basically what graphic scales look like. And the reason that they're so important is when we put them on a drawing, they're automatically going to scale with that drawing. So if I put a graphic scale that represents, let's take a look at this example. So 0 to 5 meters. So this would be a metric scale. But if you were looking at any increment from 0 to 5, so this represents what it would look like in the actual drawing. And then if I was to print that at a scale that the architect or the engineer didn't intend that to be printed at, this would automatically scale with that drawing that I'm printing. And that would mean that if I measured from there to there and I reference up to my drawing, it would still equal 5 meters in my actual drawing. So what this allows you to do is, even if you say my drawing is at 1/16 of an inch equals a foot, or my drawing is at 1/32 of an inch equals a foot, it allows, if that drawing is actually printed differently, it gives a graphic for someone to understand how far a certain distance is. They're really helpful even when they're printed not when prints are done at the right scale, just because they give a really quick graphic reference for, okay, that's what 1 foot looks like, okay, that's what 5 feet looks like, that's what 10 feet looks like. And they help to scale your drawing really quickly. So what we're going to look at here is drawing out, I'm going to just draw a box for the sake of what we're doing here. So let's go 100 feet, and then we'll go 10 feet. I'm really tiny here. And then let's go 50, and then we can we'll just finish this out and make a shape that looks something like that. So what we're going to do here first, something that you don't necessarily have to do, but we're just going to get a base for how big this object's actually going to sit on our sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my layouts. Another way to do this would be, you can technically scale. We can draw out a little 8.5 inch by 11 piece of paper if that's what we're going to print on, and we can get an idea for what scale this is actually going to be at. So let's actually do it that way. So the way that I like to do this a lot of times is I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I'm just going to draw an 11 inch, and this is going to look really tiny here, by 8.5 inch by 11 inch. And we're going to look at something like that. So now the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this down. I'm going to copy it over because we're really just doing a test here. I'm actually going to go in and rotate my piece of paper first, and we'll just rotate that to be landscape. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to scale this scale, and then click a base point, and then we'll go 1 divided by 12. So what's that doing for me? That's allowing me to get this down to 1 inch equals 1 foot. So basically what we're saying is 12 inches equals 1 foot on here. So 1 inch equals, 12 inches equals 12 feet, 1 inch equals 1 foot. So that's how you would scale it that way. And then what I can do is I can start experimenting here. So if I go scale, and then if I go 1 divided by 16, you'll see that I have a 1/16 equals a foot model here, and again that is actually 100 feet, so we could go in and measure that to make sure that we're at the right scale. Again, this is just for reference. So I know that now a 1/16 of an inch equals a foot actually will fit onto my piece of paper. If that doesn't fit, if that doesn't work, you can scale that, you can undo that. So Control Z, and then let's say scale, and then we'll go 1 divided by 32, and that would scale it to 1/32 of an inch equals a foot, and then you can sit that on your sheet. So let's go in and double check on our layout. So we're just going to go in and go to layout. We'll just draw out a little rectangular viewport. We'll double click in here and we'll actually find our object. If we double click outside of that and then we highlight this, we can go down here and we can actually set up a scale. So we see 1/16 of an inch equals a foot, sits well on our actual page. So we know that that's a good scale for that. I believe the projects that you guys are working on right now are going to be either 1/16 of a foot, 1/16 of an inch equals a foot, or 1/32 of an inch equals a foot for the scale. So now let's go in and let's see how we would go about drawing a graphic scale for this. So one way would be to draw it in model space, and I think this is the easiest way to understand how we're going to be looking at this. So let's go back and look at a couple of examples here. The one I like to use as a reference here is this. So we're looking at a certain amount of increments here. So we have 0, half of an x, x, 2x, and 4x. So if we go back to our AutoCAD file, let's just draw that out as feet. So if we draw this over, we'll turn ortho on. We'll do 0.5 feet. Then let's just go down by 1. Then we're going to go over another 0.5 feet. Then we'll go up by 1. Then we need to do 1 foot. We'll go down by 1. And then in order to get to our final, we would add 2 feet to that. And then we would go up. So then we would basically have something that looks like this. So this, obviously, in comparison to our object, is very, very small, right? So if we say that this equals half a foot, that's half a foot, that's 1 whole foot, and that's 2 feet, this is too small. So if we go into our layout and we look on our page and we see how big this thing actually is, we'll go down here and we'll say, wow, that's way too small for what I'm doing here. So what I can start doing here is actually just scaling this up. And let's start by scaling it, let's say by 4. And let's see, does that still look too small? It looks a little bit too small. So if I scale it again, we'll scale it by 2 feet. That looks about right proportionally to my drawing. So what I'm going to look at here now is I have this drawn out basically as a proportion, so as a relationship. So I have 0.5, 0.5, 1, and then 2. This equals a half of an increment, a full, 2, and then 4. So when I look at this now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to measure it because it is already scaled to my object here. So if I measure this, I'm going to see that from there to there equals 4 feet. From here to there equals 4 feet. From there to there equals 8 feet. And then from there to there equals 16 feet. So what I can do here is I can go in and add text. And I can say 0 feet. So I can add that there. Obviously, you'll spend a little bit more time with graphics here. So I can copy that over. Whoops. CO is circle. So I can copy that over, and I can make it look like this. And then what I can do is if I forgot what that was, I can click over here. So I have 4 feet here. And then if I measure from there to there, I have 8 feet total. So these are all going to be in totals. So you're going from there to there is 16 feet. And then from there to the end is going to be 32 feet. Good. So now what do we know from this? So we know that if I have a 32-foot long scale and my drawing is at 1/16 of an inch equals a foot, that means that this should be 2 inches long on my layout. So let's go into my layout and we're going to check the length of this. So if we go to measure, it's going to give us 32 feet here, right? Because that's actually going to be in the units that my actual model are in. So if I click polyline, I'm just going to get a general reference here for if I'm in the right ballpark. So I draw a line that's 2 inches and I see that that's the right length. Now, how could I do this if I didn't want to do it in model space? So this is basically just to get an understanding of what we're doing. Basically, we're drawing something at full scale, and then when we scale this drawing down, it's going to scale along with it. There's different ways to graphically work on this. So obviously, we can draw lines down. And then we can draw them over. And you can make this look like any one of the examples. You can make it fit your graphic style. So you can do something that looks like this one, something that looks like these. You can do a little bit more simple ones where they're just a straight bar. You can do any of these ones that sort of go up and down, or they're just lines, or they're a full sort of fill here. The really only important thing is that they're at the same scale as your drawing is at. So let's say I don't really want to do it in model space. I just wanted to get an idea for what it would look like. So what we can do is we can actually go into our layout and we can draw things as they would appear on our layout. So what we're going to do first is I'm just going to go into my layout here and go to page setup. And then I'm going to just go to display, close. And then if I go to modify here, I'm just going to try to show this so that it actually looks black. All right, so black should look a little bit easier to understand here. So now let's say I want to actually not draw this at full scale in model, because in model that we're going to have all kinds of problems with text, and you're going to have to get into annotative text and things like that. So let's say that I want to draw this afterwards. So what I can do is I can actually just draw on my layout. So if I look at this, I'm not going to know how long that is, but if I say 0 to 4 feet, I know I'm at 1/16 of an inch equals a foot. So 4 feet is a quarter of that. So I'm going to be looking at a quarter of an inch. So if I draw a line at a quarter of an inch, and then I go down by, let's say, 0.1, then I can just explode this. And the way I usually do this is I just copy this. So I say, we're going to copy it there. Then I'll go ahead and copy this one over. Then I know that I need a line basically twice that long to get to here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this over to here, and then I'll just do a scale by 2. So that's going to give us that leg. Then we can do another copy here. We can copy that. And then I know again I'm double here. So I can do a copy. And we're going to go ahead and scale that by 2. And then we'll go ahead and copy this. And we see that we have something that looks very similar. So if I go ahead and join this, and then I move this over here, what I'm going to see, or what I should see, is that these increments should align. So I have one going over there, one coming down, one coming up. So what I've done is in the model, I've allowed myself to gauge for what's going to actually look right on the page as far as scaling. And then what I've done is I've recreated that now in my paper space to have a lot more control over what this looks like. So now that you know what this is, if you wanted to do your text, you can also do that in your layout space. That's what I usually do. Would be to add all of the text to this and all of the graphic styling in your actual layout. And then the other thing that you can do is you can export this out to a program like Illustrator or like Rhino, and you can do it there. So the last sort of comment here is that you can do a lot of pre-made ones here. So you don't necessarily have to draw one for each time you're doing this. So what we can look at is if, let's say we go into our layout 2 and we say, generally speaking, we always want our graphic scales to be something like that long. So from here, what we can do is we can go in and we can start drawing scales out. So if I look at something like 1/16 of an inch equals a foot, I'm again going to go into here and go to my page setup manager and just switch that to that. Just so that these lines actually turn black. Okay. So now if we wanted to go in and draw one of these, we know that we can use as a starting point, we can use our 32nd inch one. So let's go over here and we're just going to copy this. So we'll do a Control C and then a Control V. So let's say we generally want them to be that long. So what I can do here is I can copy this. And what I know here is that if this is 0, this is 4, that's 8, that's 16, and that's 32. So let's add some text here. And I'm just going to do this really quickly. So if we were to move this over here and we copy this over, looking at something like this. So we know at 1/16 of an inch equals a foot, that's 4 feet, 8, 16, and 32. Good. So we can look at this again, we can double check. So if we look, we can go 1/4 of an inch, we know that that's right. What I like to do here is I like to copy this up and just give myself a tag here that just says that this is the label for 1/16 of an inch equals 1 foot. Okay, now what if we wanted something that was at half this scale? So what if we wanted something that was actually at 32nd of an inch equals a foot? So let's copy this. And we're going to here set up what 1/32 of an inch equals a foot looks like. So if I do a regen, that will make that black again. So let's go ahead and copy some of these numbers down. So if we copy these down, what we know about this is that 1/32 of an inch equals a foot. What is a 1/4 of an inch equal to? So if we take a quarter of this, we can look at this being actually 8 feet now represented, as opposed to 4 feet in this. And we know that this makes sense because a 1/32 of an inch equals a foot drawing is actually half the scale of a 1/16 of an inch equals a foot drawing. So therefore, this number should be half of that number. So basically, that line is representing twice as much distance in a scale that's actually half of that one. So what we can do here now is we can go ahead and copy this, and we'll look at this being then 16, and so on. So we can keep copying that over. So then we can also go the other way. So if we copy this down, and then we do 1/8 of an inch equals a foot here, what we know then is that if we measure this line, and this again is because this is in our final scale, so 1/4 of an inch. So then what we know about this is this should actually equal 2 feet. So a 1/4 of an inch here is basically 2 of these increments, which equals 2 feet. So if we do a regen, that will make that 2. Then again, we would go to 4 here. So these now would be half of what these are because this is twice the scale as that is. So what the nice thing is here now is that once you finish these and once you get them graphically looking as good as you want, you can just go ahead and say, I have a drawing that's 1/32 of an inch equals a foot. I'm going to go ahead and grab this one, copy it into my layout, and I'm done. I have a drawing that's an 1/8. I'll copy this one and I'll move on. So these are really, really nice. I do this a lot in my own work where I actually pre-make a lot of the graphic scales. What I wouldn't recommend doing, so you can go into Paperspace, you can also do these, basically draw this out at full scale in something like Rhino if you're not using the Paperspace in Rhino. So this is not something that exclusively can happen here. You could also have done this just as easily in your model space, and then you can plot that out actually at full scale. So you can do things like that. What I wouldn't recommend doing is doing any of this kind of drawing part in Illustrator. So if you're exporting a drawing to Illustrator, that's fine for now, but I wouldn't do any of this drawing part in Illustrator. If you want to do the labels and things like that, that's totally fine. In Illustrator, you can also click on a single one of these lines and you can figure out how long it is, and then you can figure out what your increment should be here. But make sure that you don't do this physical drawing. It's not an accurate program, and you're going to want this to actually come out of the native program that you're actually using with the drawing that you're creating. So that's the basic to graphic scales. There's not a whole lot to them. You can figure out your own increment here. You can go 2, 2, 2, 2. You can do whatever you'd like. There's all different kinds. And again, the only thing that matters here is that this thing that you're drawing is scaled properly to the drawing that you actually have here. So 1 foot in this drawing needs to equal 1 foot on this scale. 4 feet on this scale needs to equal 4 feet in this drawing, and so on. So make sure that that's right, and you'll never go wrong with a graphic scale.